Welcome, Karen, to the Courage to Advance podcast. I am so happy you're here with us today.
Oh, thanks, Kim. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, let's start by giving our listeners a little bit of just kind of high level about your journey. And then
Yeah.
I've got so many great questions for you that I hope will really benefit those listening today. So, please start by telling everybody kind of how you've gotten to this place.
Okay. So I started my career actually in line business positions, management positions in a Midwest retail organization, department store, and worked my way into the buying office. So spent some time in the buying office as well, and then convinced someone to give me a shot in human resources. And since then, for the last, oh gosh, 30 years, I've had a career in all of the different areas of human resources. And my last role was head of HR for a company that was privately held, private equity held, and then went public while I was there. So had some really great experiences throughout my life. And now on this next act, I have the opportunity to coach as well as do a little bit of HR consulting.
Very exciting. I love that. So, let's dive right in. So, you and I have been talking about this a bit. Many executives really build their identity around the professional role.
Yeah,
And part of why you're here today is to really talk about some of the challenges that come up in that journey. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what was your most vulnerable moment during your career transition and what specific act of courage did it take to move through the fear rather than being paralyzed by it?
great question. And yes, so identified by the work that we do and the work that we love to do. I think my most vulnerable moment was well, I've sat in the job seeker seat twice, and I've sat in the client seat several times as well. I think from the job seekers side, it was realizing that I really didn't want to be in the corporate HR world any longer. I wanted to do the things that I love to do. I also was really honest with myself and realized I'm not great at everything in human resources. And that was okay. And it was very empowering and made me able to take a risk and feel bold in being vulnerable and realizing I wanted to really focus in the areas that I felt I was really good at. And that gave me a lot of confidence to be able to take that leap.
And just to clarify a little bit further, that was really because of downsizing that needed to take place in your organization, really being forced to have to make a transition yourself in a way that perhaps wasn't as expected, correct?
Definitely. I think there were also, in looking back, things that, again, I was really good at, but not everything. And it gave me the opportunity to look at that and say, that's okay, because this is really where I want to focus my time and energy anyway. And I don't know that I would have done that as much having not had the experience of going through a reduction in force, a downsizing, an outplacement opportunity that really helped me to realize that.
And it's so important that we're talking about this now. There's a lot of uncertainty in our economy as
Gosh,
we
yeah,
record this. There's a lot of just every day we're seeing layoffs through the government. We're seeing layoffs through private industry. So when you think about you could back at that, you could have at the time when you were, maybe even first impacted, how did you how did your identity as a leader shift during your transition from head of HR into experiencing outplacement yourself?
I think in several ways. I think the first one was realizing that it was okay to be vulnerable, that there wasn't shame attached to being part of a reduction in force, and that you could grab that as an opportunity. I know opportunity doesn't always come to mind when you think about being part of a reduction in force, but if you shift your mindset to looking at it as an opportunity, and you take that opportunity to really revisit your values and think about who it is that you want to be and what it is that you want to be doing in that moment. I
Mhm.
think I also realized that empathy, authenticity, transparency are absolutely fine in a leadership role. And for me, when I show up as my authentic, transparent, vulnerable self, I'm at my best. And it took me a while to realize what was my best, but I can't fake it. And if I don't show up that way, it's not a good situation for anybody. So I think those were my biggest learnings as a leader experiencing that.
You mentioned the word shame, and I think that's something that I'd like to just talk a little bit more about. I
Yeah.
think that's something that such a natural emotion that people can feel, and sometimes we feel that when things are completely out of our control. We don't have we really weren't we didn't do anything from a performance standpoint. This is truly,
Yeah.
economic pressure. And so, you know, can you talk a little bit more about that feeling, not only that you experienced, but how where that shows up with others as well, and in some of the work you do now?
So, probably the biggest place it shows up is when I talk to leaders about what we call their transition statement, how you went from one position to another, and you answer that question, why did you leave your last job? Especially if it wasn't necessarily your choice to leave that last job. And I bring in that authenticity, that vulnerability, that transparency
Mhm.
that suggests to people, it's your choice, but suggests to people to be your authentic, honest self. And I tell you what, the first time I told that story, it kind of got caught in my throat. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to be this transparent and authentic? And I tell you what, it gave me the biggest boost of confidence and again, helped me be more bold and take some risks. I'll never know for sure, but I don't think I ever had a challenge in finding my next role by telling my own authentic, very real, transparent story. It's up to everyone, but I really encourage my clients to do that.
So when you were uh, going through the experience yourself,
Hmm.
was that what was the most challenging part? Was it trying to get to this place of being
Mm.
honest with yourself? Was it navigating that, any sense of guilt or shame yourself? Or talk a little bit more about, that as well.
I think it was all of those things, Kim. It was definitely setting aside the shame and getting comfortable with telling my story in a way that was authentic to me. But it was also realizing that it was okay to ask for help. I had been that person all my life that was helping others, in my personal life and my professional life, certainly as a head of HR and all through my HR career. And to realize that I needed to ask some people for help was the first step. And then the
Yeah.
second step was realizing what I was asking for. What was I asking people to help me with? And when I came to that realization and I came up with the things that I was asking for help with, I realized how vast my network was and how much people want to help you. You just need to sometimes help them know how to help you in those situations because people want to help, they just don't always know how.
I think that's such a great point. And I think in such our busy time, how quickly things are moving, and then with uncertainty, it can be
Yeah.
deprioritized for a lot of us, I think.
Hmm.
So if you could go back and you really tell yourself on the day you receive the news, just your best words of wisdom, what would that be?
I think it would be everything's going to be okay. And just take a pause, take a breath, and have a plan.
Mhm.
I'm a huge planner. Anybody who knows me is going to laugh their head off at that. I'm a really big when they hear that. I need a plan. And when you are a person that likes a plan, being in a job search isn't the time to turn that off and think you're going to throw caution to the wind and be willy-nilly. It's the time to really invigorate that side of you. Work with a coach if you have a company that has given you the opportunity, but also think of your plan, but be willing to tweak it as you go and as you
Mhm.
learn new things. What works, what doesn't work. So everything's going to be okay. Confidence, and really also take a look at who do you want to be in this next chapter of your life. You have an opportunity to change some things up, show up a little bit differently, really hone in on the things that you're really good at. And that's all values work that you can do on your own, or you can do with another partner or coach, and really determine what are your values that you really want to make sure you find in your next company or in your next act.
So one of the things that I think would be great for us to expand on a little bit more for listeners is when we talk about the type of coaching, not only that you do, but you receive that was so pivotal
Mm-hmm.
in this transition for yourself. Talk a little bit about the difference between the career coaching aspect and other types of coaching that people may be familiar with, such as executive coaching, of which you really at Spark Effect, we have both that we bring
Yeah.
forward. And yet there's a really important difference. They're not typically the same types of coaches. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I think first and foremost, they both start out knowing that the client, the participant, the person that you're sitting across from controls the agenda, and really meeting that person where they're at. That's not different in either executive or leadership coaching or career transition coaching. It's all about getting to know your client, getting to know the person that's sitting across from you, and where are they in this moment and what do they need. And I've had some clients that we've spent 5 sessions in the kind of grief and
Mm,
processing what happened and moving through that, what we talked about earlier on, which was shame. But then I think where the difference is career transition coaching is a little bit more, it brings in a little bit more advisory work for
mm,
those of us who've been here, and the great tools that we have available to us through Spark Effect to give some structure to that search, give a roadmap to that search. We can still jump around within that roadmap based on what the client needs are. But is networking your biggest challenge? Let's jump into that. Is interviewing your biggest challenge? Let's jump into that and really develop your questions as well as what the questions are that you think this company, recruiter, or hiring manager is going to ask you. That doesn't necessarily, of course, happen in leadership or executive coaching.
mhm.
So I think that's probably where the biggest difference is. Is there are real tried and true tools that we have available to offer to a client to use based on where they sit and what their biggest needs are, meeting them
That's
where they're at.
That's really
Sorry.
important, helpful. That's really, really helpful. So, given our, the name of our podcast is Courage to Advance. What does courage to advance mean to you now that you've been, you through this transition out, out the other side, now doing this work to help others navigate it? What is that?
Courage to
Mhm.
advance was first off taking the opportunity to move into a coaching and consulting role and getting my certification and doing all the things that I needed to do to set up my business. And then really believing that people would come to me for this expertise and utilize my services. So it was really being bold and making a career choice in that moment, maybe a little earlier than I planned, but the timing was right to take that opportunity. So taking a risk, being a little bit bold, and trying something new because of that values work that I had done that I mentioned in the last question,
Yeah.
of knowing this is the right time, this is where I want to be, and this is what I want to do. And again, back to our one of our first questions, knowing myself, showing up as my authentic, transparent self is always important to me. I just didn't know it early on.
I think that's so important for everybody. And sometimes that's really scary for people
Yeah.
too, to feel so vulnerable and
Yeah.
transparent when these really just life-changing moments are occurring.
Yeah, just
Please.
one other thing that really was eye-opening for me. I've always had a good network. You're talking to somebody who has best friends from kindergarten. So networking has always been an important part of my life, but I didn't always realize it as a network. And I didn't realize how powerful my network was until I went to it for some help with my job searches. And then when I went to it, when I started um, my own business, and the amount of support when I asked for it was it just blew me away. And everybody has that. And it's never too late to start cultivating that network, because it will absolutely get you through whatever this next challenge is when you turn to your network.
Is such an important point. And the fact that people inherently want to be helpful, and sometimes they just don't know to
Yeah,
help because you don't
exactly.
maybe know how to ask exactly for what you need, or it's just you're afraid to ask. And I want to spend some
Yeah,
time on that in our
yeah.
conversation. Before we get there, were there any blind spots that you discovered about executive transition that weren't maybe as visible that for sometimes I think people, the reason I think that's an interesting view to have from you is that sometimes I think people don't know what the real benefits are of engaging in this type of support when it's available. And I'd be curious if there was maybe some preconceived notions that you had or blind spots in that way.
I think as a participant, I thought I knew exactly what I needed to do,
Mhm.
and I didn't. I knew how to do it from a hiring manager or certainly an HR perspective, but I didn't know how to do that from a job seeker perspective. So that was probably the first thing. Um, and then I think I go back to that asking for support when you need
Yeah.
it and getting into that vulnerable place where you say, I need support from my network or from my coach or from
Hmm.
a, a, a micro session or a podcast or whatever it is. And that, again, the confidence that that gave me and the ability to be a little bit more bold and take a risk was something that was learning definitely
Hmm.
for me. And then yeah, go ahead.
No, no, please.
I was just going to say from the other side of the desk, from the HR leader side of the desk, it was really realizing that an organization that you partner with for career transition services for people who are leaving your organization through a reduction in force, any kind of a layoff, is that organization and coaches can help in ways that you as an HR leader can no longer help in. It's just a different approach when someone is there to support that person that you have just laid off. And
Yeah.
the ability to have that support for them, coaches aren't therapists, but it's very much a mental health support in that scenario that as an HR leader or as a a manager or any kind of an executive, you just can't offer that person any longer, in addition to all of the tools that I talked about. So the practical support, but boy, that empathetic, really heartfelt support that you can get from an organization that's in this space is really, really beneficial.
So it's a bit of that. What we all crave is to be seen and heard. And in the
Oh,
most
yeah.
deepest, darkest moments of our lives, having that type of resource can be really critical
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I want to and talk a little bit about some of the organizational impacts that we see. I think, you obviously know firsthand, we experience people who have a range of emotion when they come. And sometimes that emotion is coming from how it was handled, how the separation was handled in the organization itself, right? And how that really just kind of carries through with them as well. So I'm curious that, when you think about some of that, that different levels of emotion, and based on your experience of having been on both sides, what are the outplacement practices that truly make a difference for executives and organizational health to really get it right?
I'd say a couple of different things. One from the career transition side is that ability to again meet the person where they're at and tailor the engagement with that person to the needs of that individual. And if I've got 8 different clients that I'm working with, it's 8 different approaches for
Mhm.
what that person needs in that moment. Um, I think it's also that roadmap that I mentioned of having the ability, you've got a roadmap that starts here and ends here. And the thought is you work through that entire roadmap to get to the success on the other side of it. But if we need to move around within that roadmap, we can absolutely do that. It is It's the ability to, again, I keep saying this, but meet that individual where they're
Right.
at and fulfill those needs.
Not a linear process
That a
by any
linear,
means.
absolutely great
Yeah.
point. It's that model of change. And you could be chugging along through it, and something happens to put you back at the beginning of that process. And we're going to go back to the beginning of that process again. I think from a company perspective, it's the ability to have someone leave your organization knowing that you did everything that you could to take care of them, to help them, give them a landing, give them some support in moving on. They might not feel that right in that moment, but people talk, and they are going to talk about the support that you gave them. And it's important for the people who are left behind to know that you did everything that you could in that moment. It doesn't make it any less tough, but it does make it a little bit more manageable to know that
Mhm.
this person is going to be able to move on to something. I think, Kim, I can almost always say people move on to something bigger and better
Yeah.
with that support.
That's fantastic. So having been head of HR, sitting in the position where these difficult decisions you've had to face and
Yeah.
make, what do you feel many organizations just get fundamentally wrong about the approach to outplacement? And perhaps what could they do to improve it from your experience?
I'd say a couple of things. I think, first off, the value that companies miss or forget, or don't realize in outplacement, and that the money that they pay for that is so valuable. One, to the individual that's been
Mhm.
affected. You've just turned their life upside down. Oftentimes, people are blindsided by that. So, that support that you give them, that they can meet with a coach the next day or the next week or the next month, whenever it works out for them, is so important to, I mentioned, their health, their
Mhm.
well-being, and their ability to have a support system and to have a roadmap to know it's going to be okay and they're
Mhm.
going to land. And I think from the company standpoint, it's knowing that someone is going to be empathetic and understanding and experienced in this work to be able to help them get to the other side in a successful way that shows them that there is an opportunity there.
So to expand on that just a little bit further, right? Organizations have the fiduciary responsibilities when,
Sure.
the perception of, hey, when we're making, cuts for, economic reasons or whatever the investment reasons, you- sometimes it may not intuitively make sense to maybe a CFO or others around, well, why are we going to pay for individuals? Because I think that's an important piece when services are offered to individuals from an organization's perspective. The individuals aren't paying, but the organization is the one sponsoring it.
Yeah.
So, what do you feel like? How can organizations reconcile that of this investment that and the organization and the brand and everything like that?
I think it's investment and brand, those two things that you said. And I'd also add the empathy that you
Hmm.
want to have towards your employees. These are your alumni. These are people, as I mentioned, that are going to be talking about their experience with your organization. So your brand is absolutely wrapped up in that. And the ability to have that person talk in a positive light about their experience with the organization, I think is really important. I think we also, as career transition coaches, are very cognizant of the fact that their company paid for this, and we do reiterate that in our conversations that it's not their expense, it's their
Hmm.
company's, and that helps them take advantage of it probably even more so. It's a tough decision to
Hmm.
make that choice in light of the fiduciary responsibility, but I think having experienced it on both sides of the fence, I can talk to the fact that it really is worth that investment in those individuals who are moving on. We've all heard the horror stories. We don't need to bring them up here, but we've all heard of those stories of how
Yeah.
companies handle transitions. And it doesn't have to be that way. There can
No.
be empathy and transparency and honesty in the process. And that definitely transfers into the career transition work. Absolutely.
Do you feel like the organizations when it's not such a when it's a terrible experience, Would you say that that's often rooted in the culture of the organization? Do you feel like there's
Mm,
correlation there that translates to just that disconnect?
I think it's a lot of different things, um, complex and simple. I think probably first and foremost, it does go back to the culture of the leadership
Hmm.
in that organization to be empathetic, to be transparent, to be honest, and not to be afraid of what's going to come from that, but to be
Right.
caring for that
Yeah,
individual that you were affecting their life.
absolutely. I think, one of the things we haven't talked about yet, and I want to just touch on briefly before we move into some of the areas that individuals can really look to prepare themselves and do immediately, is really thinking about those who are not impacted, who are left behind in a sense. And some of that consideration for organizations, is there anything you can share about what you took into account when you were in that head of HR role, recognizing that you also have this population that is, continues to stay there, and what does it do for them?
I think sometimes we forget that. Organizations forget that there are survivors or people
Mhm.
who are left behind by those who've exited. Sometimes their manager, sometimes a colleague who has become their best friend. And it's really hard sometimes for them. So the care and feeding of your organization of people who remain that you want to be great, productive, happy citizens in your company is really important too, your team members. And that empathy, that transparency, that honesty transfers to them too. Town halls where people have the opportunity to talk about it, and leaders who are willing to answer tough questions when these scenarios or situations happen immediately, not days or weeks, but
Yeah.
immediately after whatever the event is, not having it trickle through, multiple days. I mean, there's just some really um, simple but complex things that you need to think about and plan for the people who are still with your organization, as much as you plan for the conversation where someone is going to exit, or as much as
Yes.
you plan for who is going to exit. Every single piece of that equation is so important and deserves equal attention. And I would also say, working with a group of transition coaches, a career transition company ahead of that, we can provide some of that guidance because we've seen it
Yes.
happen really well and we've seen it happen really poorly. And the difference is very impactful to the individual as well as to the organization.
Well, and it matters to the brand impact, it matters to the engagement, it matters to the involuntary turnover that could come after, or to the voluntary turnover that could come afterwards with people
Right.
not feeling like that things were handled well. I
Mm-hmm.
think it has a very significant ripple effect that organizations need to be accounting for, and it's beyond just the simple dollars and cents of the immediate situation in front of them. So if somebody's trying to sit and think about what their values are, what might be a question you'd say, hey, start by answering,
Yeah.
maybe not just as simply as what are my values, but what are some of the questions you might suggest people just reflect on as a good place
Yeah.
to start?
It's a great question. Values work can be done by a list saying, here's my values. I think sometimes then you end up with aspirational values, which is
Mm,
fine. Values can be aspirational. I like to do values work by telling stories. And I start
ooh,
with, tell me about a time when you worked in a position or on a team when you were at your very best. And just tell me the story. And then I jot down the words that I hear that lead to values. And then I might go to another one of saying, tell me the time where it was really challenging for you. It could be your personal life or your professional life. Tell me that story. And I, again, do the work to write down those
mhm,
words. And then after two, three, four stories, whatever that is, I go back to the person with the list of words. And at that point, it's probably 20 or 30 words that are values. And then I let them sit with those for a while and really think about the words and what hits them the most, what lands with them the most, and what's the most impactful to them. And then we meet again and we narrow that list down. I think that's the best way to get at values because it's what I hear and what I read back to them through their stories.
That's
And it's
such a
really fun.
oh my goodness, that's such a fantastic approach. I haven't thought of that in that way of letting yourself just talk and letting someone else do some of that filtering through because of
Yeah,
the intonation and the way we think about how we've taught the story and even the body and like how our body shifts and our our features change as we start to talk about something that
that's
has excited
exactly it.
us and
Where do you light up?
yeah.
Where do you not light up? And those are the things absolutely that I'm looking for. And the number of times that I've sent the values list or I've typed it into a chat and had a person really think about it, the number of times they've said, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about that. Of course that's one of my values." Is really fun and really exciting work to do and really impactful for the individual. I I think they always walk away with a better idea and understanding of what their values are. And then we work to, okay, but what does this mean for you when you are looking for your next role? How do you ask questions of a
Mhm.
company that help you, dig into that organization and the culture of that organization to determine if this is going to be the best place for you based on those values? It's
it
such great work.
It really is. And so what I want to do is let's close out by bringing forward some of these, practical nuggets that people can embrace right now. So for those who perhaps are are not impacted, I would guess that maybe but somebody's probably knows somebody who has been at this stage. So for themselves, like let's talk a little bit about what people could do proactively
Yep.
in the way. And one of the things you've talked about is the importance of network. And I think
Yep.
that's where maybe we should start. So what would you advise people to do no matter how busy they feel life is to really what can they do to address that opportunity with their
Yeah.
network?
When you asked the question, I was thinking of three things: networking, networking, networking. To be proactive, no matter what you want to do, no matter if you're thinking about a career change that you're going to initiate, or you're thinking about a career change that may come through no fault of your own, and you're just caught up in whatever the challenges of the organization are. It's never too late to start. I've talked to so many leaders who come to their first meeting with, "I have no network.
Mhm.
I have no network." Not true. Everyone has a network. Some are bigger than others, certainly, but a network can be six people. You really have to take the time to think about who that is. List it out. Take an Excel or a
Mhm.
Word document and
Yeah.
list out who your network is. Why do you know them? Who are they? What's their contact info? And how can they help you? But the other thing is, how can you help them? Networking is a two-way street. We all know those people that show up in our email box or in a text saying, "I need your help." Happy to help them. But they're those people that come to you only when they need help. What can
Mhm.
you also give to your network? And before you need it is the right time to do that. I saw an article and I thought of you. I know the last time we talked, this was a challenge you were dealing with. Here's something that really helped me. Send a link. Something really simple and easy that takes you, I don't know, what does that take? 3 minutes to go pull a link and
Right.
send it to someone. The the feeling that you have as an individual who gets that from a former colleague, a former boss, a friend for years is so good. So be that
Yes.
person that brings that joy to someone when you look at your phone and say, "Oh, Karen Hague got in touch with me today. I'm really excited to hear from her." So it's never too late to do that, Kim.
I agree, and I think let's stay on that topic a little bit more. So we talk about everybody knows LinkedIn, and I want to dive into that in just a moment, but also
Yeah.
your community. So whether, if you
Yeah.
have kids in school and there's there's events around that, there's community there. There's community there in faith-based organizations. There's community in, so I think sometimes people think, well, my network feels small because we put a barrier between our professional and our personal lives. And I think one of the big opportunities for people is to shift around. It all flows together in different ways, and your community's,
Yep.
inclusive of all those type of outlets that you touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like most of us are saying, there's no more work and personal. Everything is blended together. I'd say the same thing about your network. Your network can be personal connections that you've known forever or you've known for a day. It can be business associates that maybe you've never worked with, but you've interacted with
Mm-hmm.
on somewhat of on a professional level. It can be colleagues, it can be former team members that have reported to you, it can be bosses that you've reported to. It is all of those things. That's why I say start with a blank sheet and write down
Mm-hmm.
everyone you know. When you're brainstorming your network, just like brainstorming a business problem, there's no judgment. Just put down everybody you know, don't judge it, and then go back later and prioritize it because not all networking connections are equal, but all of them are good and all of them are relevant. And it may take you a while to get to the sixth one or the 36th one, but start with those ones that are, more of a priority based on whatever it is that you need in the moment. Do you have a business problem that you're trying to solve? Go out to your network. Do you
Right.
have a business problem that you have solved that you know somebody else is struggling with? Give it to your network.
Yeah.
And then if you find yourself in the situation, when you find yourself ready to make your next move, your network is there for you.
It's there for you. And I think I love how you said that there's so many ways that we can be tapping into that
Yeah.
so we just have to think a little bit more broadly. Let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit, and it goes both ways. And I think one of the things that
Yes.
we often, just maybe sometimes human nature, is we don't assume either somebody's going to have interest in what we do, or that they have that that they have any relevancy into what we do. And I think that's such an erroneous determination, because really you never know who knows who. And that's,
Exactly.
being open to what's possible and what you can give is really, really important. So I want to talk a little bit about the LinkedIn, and a little bit more
Yep.
tactically there, because I think one of the, it's the predominant tool, right? So most people are on LinkedIn. I recognize that maybe not everybody is, based on sometimes even their own, the type of profession they're in, but by far most are. And one of the things that I love what you were saying around, it doesn't even have to be through LinkedIn, but an article that you see, or a podcast that you heard, or something that maybe just feels relevant to touch base with. I also, in back in the November, December timeframe, we did a gratitude campaign. We've been doing this for about the last 5 years. And one of the things that we really encouraged people to do this year was to proactively send a little note, to people on LinkedIn, give them their, a recommendation or a shout out in ways that there's perhaps really unexpected. Is there, as we wrap up, is there a particular way you advise, you know, the leaders you work with, the executives you support, around how to make that two-way ask in the most effective way? To your point, not necessarily asking for a job, but even asking for a coffee or a conversation or anything like that. Is there some tips about that that you would really recommend for people?
Yeah. Great question. Um, I think the first one I would say is just start somewhere. Once you
Mhm.
get one under your belt, the next one's going to be easier, and the third one and the 10th one are going to be even easier. So start somewhere. Start with the people that you know, because that's easiest. But I will also tell you, surprisingly, sometimes it's the people you don't know that are the most willing to help you. Sometimes
Yes.
those close connections will disappoint you. You can't try to figure it out. You just kind of need to move
Hmm.
on from it. But don't be afraid to ask someone that you don't know as well to get a resume in front of someone. Or, hey, you work for a company that's a target of mine. Do you have 20 minutes to meet and talk to me about what it's like to work at that organization? Most people will have 15 to 20 minutes to give you. So it starts somewhere. It's never too late. And provide a way that someone can help you. People want to help, they just don't always
Mhm.
know how. So if you're asking, example, if you're asking for an introduction to a hiring manager or a person at a company that you would like to talk to, give them a paragraph about you that they can just copy and paste into their own email and send to someone. Make it easy and make an ask and know what your ask is from this individual. That's why when you're coming up with your networking sheet, you're listing for yourself how this person can help you, because then you
Mhm.
can go to that person with an ask that's very specific.
And I think the other, to cap that off, it's so important for people then to also say, and how can I help you? What can
Oh,
I do
yes.
to help you? Is there anything I can do at this stage as well? Yeah.
Yes, it's critical to be able to say, how can I help?
Well, Karen, this has been a fantastic
Yeah,
conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your expertise, your tips that you are implementing on a daily basis for all of these people that are impacted, and hopefully our listeners can take away some of this from a place of direction and confidence, and the organizations can
yeah,
think about this a little bit better. For our listeners, we have free resources. They're very relevant to the conversation today that you can download by visiting courage to advance podcast.com, and that will take you to our Spark Effect podcast page. You'll be able to see some other uh, previous recordings as well. Again, I want to thank Karen for sharing your journey and your insights. Thank you for the Empathy Edge for hosting our podcast subseries, and to its listeners for tuning into this episode of Courage to Advance, where transformation leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about having the courage to find them.